Welcome back to part 2 of Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about the Columbine massacre. I'm joined by my friend and roommate, Jay Light. Jay, so in this part, I think let's just walk through the timeline of what happened on that day and discuss exactly how officials responded, how students responded, what are the witness accounts of what went down.
Great.
And the day begins actually pretty early at 6 a.m. Dylan and Eric were supposed to go to their bowling class. There was a 6 a.m. bowling class from 6 to 7:15, which is insanely early for bowling or for class in general, but whatever. They rarely missed this class, but they did miss it today, even though some of their friends saw them in the area. So they were awake, and what they were doing is really up to speculation, but probably planning what was to come.
Yeah, there was a lot of planning that had to go into this. The most common misconception about Columbine is that it was a shooting, and pure and simple shooting. The facts show, when you look at all the things that they wrote and all the things they planned and the sequence of events, Columbine was basically planned as a terrorist attack on the scale of like the Oklahoma City bombing. They wanted to create more damage. And this is something that was specifically referenced by Eric Harris in his writings, that he was looking at what Timothy McVeigh did, and he wanted to do something on that scale. So a lot of their early morning was spent doing the planning to create the distractions with like the firebomb in the field that they tried to set up and to divert the authorities from the bombing at the actual school that they had planned. Getting all their bombs timed out correctly, the ones in the duffel bags, the ones in their cars. They wanted to make sure everything was wired to detonate at their certain times.
Right, because I mean, they roll up with an insane amount of ammunition. I mean,
crazy amount.
So what I have as far as guns, and we can go into the car bombs and the pipe bombs and all that. They had 2 sawed-off shotguns, a 9mm semi-automatic rifle, and a 9mm Tech 9 pistol along with their pipe bombs. But those were the main guns that were used in the attack on the school. But it wasn't just a shooting.
Exactly, and you can tell by the way that by those guns that they hadn't planned on it being a shooting. If it was planned on being a shooting, they would have gone probably with a rifle, the way that the guy at the University of Texas did, which was a pure just a shooting event. This was planned as they were gonna bomb the cafeteria and then shoot the survivors and pick them off.
Yeah.
That was their whole plan.
And when they realized that they set duffel bags, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, this is not caught on security camera. What really sits with you about the Columbine massacre is that so much of this was caught on surveillance. And by about noon that day, there were news cameras on scene. This was going national, this was going international. But the setting of the duffel bags by Dylan and Eric is not caught on security footage.
They were changing the tape out at the time.
They were changing the tape out at the time.
Like at the exact minute that they set down the bags in the cafeteria.
And because there was no precedent for this happening in the United States or really at large, one can imagine that they would have set these duffel bags down, dressed as they were in their black trench coats with their sunglasses on, and not really have caused that much suspicion. Whereas today, we are now trained in large part because of the attacks at Columbine to look out for something like that. But they just set the duffel bags down. The explosions did not go off. And so by 11:20, they begin to enter the school. They start raining down fire from where they were parked in entering the school.
Right, yeah, because their bombs, they parked in separate parking lots. Their bombs were supposed to go off at 11:17 on the dot, because that was when they timed it out to where there was going to be the most people in the cafeteria. There's the potential to cause the most collateral damage. They were trying to basically collapse the roof of the cafeteria onto the student body. So when those bombs didn't go off, they had to go to plan B, which was take their guns out and then start shooting as many people as they could.
And people don't understand what's happening, and this will be a theme throughout the day. Initially, they don't understand what, they think maybe it's a prank. It was, senior year, could have been a senior prank because, graduation was just around the corner.
They just had prom.
They had just had prom.
Perfect time for a senior prank the week after prom.
Thought it was, firecrackers could have been going off. People don't realize what's happening, or they thought it was maybe for a video. As we saw in part 1, how they were dressed and and these sort of violent themes in their videos was not very uncommon. It could have been a prop gun. But they begin to fire and they start shooting at their bombs as well, trying to figure out what's going on. People are cowering under tables, and you can see that in the security footage that people start realizing that this isn't a fucking joke.
Right.
And then from there on, from the cafeteria, they just start making their way through the school, through the hallways.
Yeah, their first victims were outside of the cafeteria. Then they started shooting in the cafeteria. Then they wandered the halls. They made their way to the library.
And the library is where there would be the biggest death toll. 10 people lost their lives, 12 were wounded. And I actually have a clip of a 911 call from Patty Nielsen, who did survive the attack. And this is her as Eric Harris is entering the library.
I do not know who the student was. I don't even think I saw him. He was wearing glass. He didn't look very large. Male student. He was out there shooting. It looked like he was climbing out and shooting. And somebody, I said, what is that? I said, what's going on with this? It's a wiretap gun. It's probably the video production. You know, they do these videos. Right. And the kids, they say, well, that's not, you know, a play gun, a real gun. I was going out there to say no. And I went, oh my God, that was really close. That's just, okay.
Yeah, I mean it's terrifying to listen to that.
Yeah.
And you see this teacher just repeating, everyone stay down, but the desks in the library were not really designed for people to be able to make their way underneath them. And so it was just this perfect storm of people looking for cover and teachers telling them, you know, you got to stay down, you have to stay under the desks, but that not really being, they're not able to do that.
Right, and there are people off to the sides and putting themselves out in the open. And so that's why, probably why the library had a much higher fatality and injury toll than the cafeteria, because cafeteria tables, you can be under them, they're longer, they're designed in a very different way than the smaller library tables.
Right, and so just to give you guys an idea of the timeline, around 11:20 they start making their way into the school. That phone call was taken at around 11:25 a.m. and around this exact same time, a bunch of 911 calls are coming in, which is, so the 911 call center gets so flooded they actually have to go into like an emergency mode, which is incredibly rare when that happens. And one of the 911 phone calls is placed by Eric Harris's father, who hears about the shooting because it's started to get some media attention, it's getting covered. And he says, I think my son, Eric Harris, could be involved in the shooting. And this is something that we can talk about in part 3 when we talk about the lasting impact of Columbine, but a lot of people had questions, how much did the parents know? And while they have asserted they didn't know anything, they had no prior knowledge of this, well, it seems as though Eric's father knew enough that when he heard about a shooting going down, he suspected his son could be involved.
Yeah.
So then this at 11:29, that is when Eric Harris and Dylan enter into the library. They say, and this is something that would get definitely twisted by the media, everyone with white hats stand up. Now, what is the significance, Jay, of everyone with white hats standing up?
White hats are jocks. And this is something that the media gets their hands on because jocks become equated to bullies. And the media coverage says that basically since Eric and Dylan were both highly bullied by the jocks specifically, they had it out for them. And there are a lot of other targets that they supposedly had based on the initial coverage. They apparently were targeting minorities, they were targeting jocks, they were targeting Christians. And a lot of this stuff becomes debunked over the course of history since the shooting. But at the time, these are the things that people latch onto because it's in all this chaos, you can't really tell what the actual story is so early on.
Yeah, what I would say to that degree is that what we see in the library is there isn't really a target, but there is so much hatred in these kids.
Yeah.
Witness reports say that Eric was a little bit more submissive, whereas Dylan was really laughing, and he was the one that actually singled out a black student and called him a name and
used a racial slur.
Yes, he used a racial slur.
And you can hear on that 911 call, you can hear them laughing and going woohoo, and it's chilling,
right,
to hear amidst all the gunfire and amidst Patty Nielsen cowering and her voice shaking as the rest of this phone call goes on while she's in hiding to avoid getting shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they continue on in the library, and the thing that is the most fascinating part about this for me is that they stop shooting before they run out of ammunition. The thing, you can tell based on the conversations that are sort of overheard, the reason why they stopped shooting, somebody mentioned, I believe it was Eric Harris who mentioned that he wasn't finding the thrill in it anymore.
Oh.
And that's part of why they stopped shooting in the library and they returned back to the cafeteria.
Right, but they exchanged some fire with law enforcement at this time who are gathered outside of the school. Now, very, very quickly there is a response from law enforcement, although a lot of people will say that it is inadequate. Law enforcement is on the scene. They have no idea what the fuck to do.
Yeah, they're just at a standoff lined up outside the school.
Right, and the doors to the library are open.
Yeah.
They're just wide open, and there isn't an officer that attempts to make their way into the library or into the school because they have no idea what to do. There's word that there could be a gunman on the roof, that there could be a sniper. I believe that turns out to be an air conditioner repairman who is just trapped on the roof. But at 11:36, they leave the library and they do go back to the cafeteria. And let's roll some footage. We'll keep our mics on so we can sort of narrate exactly what's going on when they return to the cafeteria. Some people are cowering under tables, but this is where they get very aimless. They're shooting at some of the duffel bags, they're shooting at some of the bombs, trying to see if they'll set them off. But the plan is, they don't know what the plan is anymore.
Yeah, and you can see it's about 11:45. They don't really, at this point, their plan has gone awry and they're trying to figure out what to do next. Because at this point, it's like they just mentioned in the library before, they don't really have, this was not part of what was supposed to go on. This is supposed to be a clean bombing, and then they're just shooting people as they're leaving. They didn't plan to have to actually enter the building to go and hunt people down.
Right, and to be this face-to-face with people that they knew. And we sort of see that conflict as well when they are in the library, just going back a little bit. Before they leave to go aimlessly in the cafeteria like we just saw, Dylan Klebold sees someone cowering under a table and he says, introduce yourself or reveal yourself to this person under the table. And the person says it's John Savage, who is an acquaintance of Dylan. And they lock eyes and John asks, what are you doing? And Dylan says, oh, just killing people. And John asks, are you gonna kill me? And Dylan says, no man, just get out of here.
Yeah.
And you let him go.
Yeah, and that's apparently something similar to that had happened before the shooting started as well, where they saw someone outside.
Brooks Brown.
Yep, it was Brooks.
It was Brooks Brown.
And they told him to leave.
Right, and I think that they had thought that this was going to be a more chaotic bombing, that it would be less interpersonal than it ended up being, and there is this bizarre balance of enjoying the kill. We hear that on the tapes.
Right.
We hear that they are these crazed gunmen, but then having these odd moments here and there of letting people go and talking to people that they know while they're doing the shooting.
They didn't expect it to be so human. It's interesting that you use the word interpersonal because they planned this to be totally impersonal.
Right.
A bombing is not a personal act. You don't go do that on a person by person basis. You're not planting bombs on people. You're just trying to get rid of you're trying to destroy a building. You're not trying to destroy people on an individual basis.
Yeah, so by 12 p.m. they are back in the library. The library has mostly been evacuated. People, took their opportunity to run out. And at around 12:10, 12:15 is estimated when they shot themselves. And apparently there wasn't a big to-do about this. This was some part of their plan that they'd orchestrated from the beginning. We know from their own writing, from their own accounts, that both Dylan and Eric did struggle with suicidal thoughts.
Yep, Dylan especially. Dylan was very, very suicidal. And the thing is they didn't, their suicide was also not planned to be as quiet as it was in terms of, they wanted to cause more collateral damage with that too. That's why they still had bombs in their cars. But they got to a point where their plan had gone completely off the rails.
And they were pretty much surrounded at this point. There was by this time there were SWAT teams getting ready to enter the school, although the school still had not been stormed. There was news coverage. They knew that
they knew the jig was up.
Yeah, right. And they shot themselves. Witnesses in that area overheard them say, 1, 2, 3, and then they just shot themselves. And there is that really haunting photo of them on the floor of the library, collapsed. And then by 3:25 p.m. is when the SWAT team would reach the library. So just to remind everyone that this began at around 11:20 a.m. And by 3:25 p.m. is when the SWAT team enters the library, and by 4:30 is when officials declare that Columbine High School is safe, that it has been contained.
And almost a full hour before they get into the library, there were 2 surviving students in the library. They were both injured. There was a student who had been knocked unconscious and he was going in and out of consciousness, and he had to climb out of the window of the library into the waiting arms of the SWAT team. They caught him coming out of the library, and they still didn't go into the building to rescue the other student until almost an hour later.
That's insane.
The whole scene was chaotic. This is one of those things that, in the legacy of it, which we'll get into in the next segment, they had to really look at the way schools were designed, alarm systems were designed, because the alarm system going off was ruining the chances of the SWAT team effectively getting in there and figuring out what was going on, because that just caused even more chaos in the school. The alarms are blaring. There was no real, students couldn't hear anything because it was so loud, and nobody could tell where the actual action of everything was going on for the most part. And it made it very tricky for people to pinpoint exactly where the most damage was being done.
And there were so many issues that were raised, so many questions following the Columbine massacre. And in part 3, we're gonna dive into all of that. We'll see you then.